It is Friday. It's the first day of August. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gon-young. Well, the heat is on here in Korea. The nation's weather service issued its first heat wave warning of the year for Seoul earlier this afternoon, with the mercury climbing in some areas like the district of Seocho-gu right here, where ARIRANG TV is stationed, topping 34 degrees Celsius. Other regions aren't faring any better. Some areas in the capital surrounding Gyeonggi-do province got as high as 35 degrees today. The KMA has advised people to stay inside if possible and drink plenty of water. Now moving on, and at the National Assembly with the by-elections behind them, Korea's semi-new look National Assembly is turning its focus to a number of bills designed to energize the lackluster economy and improve the people's livelihoods. And adding to these bills at the top of the agenda, in fact, is a key piece of legislation designed to uncover the exact cause of April's deadly ferry disaster. Here's our Ji Myung-gil.
More than 7,000 bills await parliamentary review, but none are perhaps as urgent as the one that is aimed at uncovering the causes of April's ferry disaster. The rival parties continue to spar over the details of the so-called Seoul ferry bill, which proposes creating a panel of inquiry to look into the tragedy. But Saenuri Party lawmakers remain opposed to giving the panel prosecutorial powers. Other bills on the table include one that would subject civil servants and their relatives to criminal penalties if they accept more than 1 million won, around $8,000, from a third party, regardless of whether it was intended as a bribe. The scope of the measures are under dispute by the parties, who can't agree on whether they should extend to siblings, spouses, or even cousins of civil servants. And with President Park Geun-hye urging all-out efforts to boost the economy, lawmakers are under pressure to pass a stack of economic bills. They range from the introduction of tax schemes that encourage companies to pay higher wages, and easing mortgage rules that limit loans for home buyers, to support for companies that transition temporary employees into permanent positions. The ruling Saenuri Party's victory in this week's by-election raised its number of seats to 158 in the 300-member National Assembly. That means the governing party can now push bills through the parliament unilaterally without the cooperation of the main opposition party. Ji Myung-gil, ARIRANG News.
The Korean government has announced an extra 5 trillion won, roughly $4.8 billion in stimulus spending. That's on top of the $40 billion package the government announced last week. Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan explained that extra funding for the measures came available because of the strengthened won, which decreased the foreign currency debt owed by public agencies. The extra $4.8 billion will be funneled towards the construction of public rental housing and power plants, helping people pay off student loans and supporting small and mid-sized companies. Korea has enjoyed export success in a number of sectors ranging from smartphones and steel to petrochemicals. But Chinese companies are now flooding the market with cheaper products, forcing Korean enterprises to branch out to other sectors. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports on China's growing dominance.
China is increasingly taking bigger bites out of Korea's pie. Chinese smartphone makers are starting to encroach on Samsung Electronics' territory. Although Samsung remained #1 in global market share in the first half of the year at 23%, China's Xiaomi was a close second at 21%. The Chinese smartphone makers are gaining ground as their skills catch up with their attractive pricing. It's a similar story for Korea's petrochemical and steel companies. The operating profits of Korea-based steelmaker POSCO in the second quarter stood at $547.6 million, down from $681 million on year. At the same time, the rate of steel imports used in the domestic market has sharply increased. The proportion of steel imports stood at 40% from January to May this year, up more than 11 percentage points compared to the same period last year. More than half of those imports came from China.
The business life cycle, when looking at the Korean steel industry, is in its maturing stages. It will be difficult to compete with competitors from China in terms of price competitiveness. Korean industries need to seek out new fields in order to survive in the global market.
An official from the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency told the Seoul-based Joseon Daily that the country needs to expand the types of goods it exports and should shift more of its focus toward consumer goods such as health and beauty products and the service sector. Kim Jeong, ARIRANG News.
Despite the threats of out of China, Korea's trade balance stayed in the black for the 30th month in July. The Trade Ministry says exports rose 5.7% on year last month to $48 billion, while imports gained 5.8% to $46 billion. Well, compared to July last year, exports of wireless mobile devices saw the biggest increase at 25%, while exports of ships went the other direction, dropping 14%. The shipbuilding industry was hit due to an 80% drop in orders from China. The Trade Ministry says related ministry officials will meet soon to discuss the slump in exports to China, which is the largest importer of Korean goods. Meanwhile, Korea's consumer prices gained at the slowest rate in 3 months in July, as the prices of vegetables and livestock stayed relatively stable. Statistics Korea says that the country's consumer price index rose 1.6% last month from a year earlier, slower than the 1.7% gain the previous month. Well, the agency attributes the low but stable price increases to a lack of severe weather conditions such as typhoons or heavy rainfall, which has led to some bumper harvests. Core inflation, which excludes things like oil and food prices, rose 2.2% on year last month. Finance Ministry officials expect the prices to remain stable, at least for the time being. So the country's R&D sector is feeling pretty okay, I suppose, but Korea's corporate heavyweights aren't faring nearly as well. Results across the board were lower than expectations in the second quarter, and experts say it could get worse before it gets better. Connie Kim reports.
Korean companies turned in disappointing earnings report cards in the second quarter this year. Tech giant Samsung Electronics' second quarter operating profit this year dropped by more than 20%, taking a blow from lower-priced Chinese smartphones. Hyundai Motor Group's net profit also dropped the most in 5 quarters, hit by the strong local currency and the growing number of import cars in the domestic market. And the world's biggest shipbuilder, Hyundai Heavy Industries, posted its worst quarterly loss of more than $1 billion in the April to June period. The company focused on overseas plants as its new growth engine, but has generated loss due to low-cost orders. Experts say prospects in the latter half of the year aren't looking bright either, forecasting no big improvements from the second quarter earnings shock.
If the strengthening of the Korean won continues, it won't be easy to generate profit even if they launch new models.
The US dollar fell below the 1,010 won mark for the first time in July since 2008, and some experts forecast the local currency to appreciate further below the psychologically important 1,000 won mark before the end of next month. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Now, the global markets reacted as expected to news that Argentina was defaulting on its debt for the second time in 13 years. Well, that uncertainty pushed the Dow Jones Industrial Average nearly 2% lower on Thursday, its biggest drop since February, and wiping out the year's gains. And the S&P 500 slipped 2% as well. Similar losses were seen in Germany's DAX and France's CAC 40, but none slid as far as Argentina's Merval Index, of course, which dropped more than 8% due to that default. And those aftershocks out of Argentina were barely felt here in Korea. The nation's benchmark Kospi did close down, but only by a little more than 0.1%, ending the day and this week at 2,073 points. It was, in fact, at the second day of decline for the index as investors kept to the sidelines after new yearly records earlier this week. Now, Kospi on Wednesday hit its highest level since August 2011. The tech-heavy Kosdaq saw gains on Friday, up 0.9% to finish the day at 541. Meanwhile, on the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency ended at 1,037 won against the greenback, down more than 9 won from Thursday's close. A group of defense experts is advising the U.S. government to work closely with China to prepare for a worst-case scenario in North Korea. What they're also suggesting is that Washington send more troops to South Korea to keep an unpredictable North Korea in check. Our Kim Min-ji explains.
American defense experts say the U.S. government needs to closely communicate with Chinese leaders in order to prepare for a state of emergency in North Korea. A report by the U.S. National Defense Panel led by former Defense Secretary William Perry and retired Army General John Abizad says the most probable emergency scenarios would be the breakout of a war or regime collapse. The independent panel assesses the Pentagon's quadrennial defense review. The report added there was an increased need to dispatch U.S. troops to South Korea amid heightened tensions on the peninsula. It added that the stationing of smart weapons was also urgent in order to ease nuclear tensions and reduce civilian deaths in case of war. Citing the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the report said North Korea is concentrating on the development of nuclear weapons and missiles because it lacks conventional military strength, adding that plans are needed to secure the North's nuclear weapons in case they fall into the hands of terrorists. The panel also said North's precise guided missiles and poor cyber community makes it difficult for U.S. defense planners to come up with plans in how to deal with an emergency situation out of Pyongyang. The panel report added the defense review fails to fully address growing national security threats, including nuclear proliferation by North Korea and Iran, the insurgency in Iraq, and the crisis in Ukraine. The chairman of the House Committee on Armed Services, Howard McKeown, said the U.S. military is facing a high risk, adding that a strong military underwrites all other tools the U.S. has for global influence. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
And the United States is once again calling on North Korea to release Kenneth Bae, the U.S. missionary who has been detained in the North for more than 18 months now. Deputy State Department spokeswoman Marie Harf says the U.S. is very concerned about his health and urged Pyongyang to grant him special amnesty and immediate release on humanitarian grounds. Now, her comments come after Mr. Bae told a pro-North Korea newspaper based in Japan this week that he felt abandoned by the U.S. government. Responding to Mr. Bae's plea, his family demanded the U.S. government do whatever it takes to bring him back home. Kenneth Bae, he is suffering a number of serious health issues, was arrested in November 2012, convicted of unspecified anti-state crimes and sentenced to 15 years of hard labor last year. A 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire in the Gaza conflict negotiated by the United States and the United Nations took effect Friday morning, a diplomatic bolt from the blue that will suspend the bloody military campaign and set the stage for negotiations between Israel and Hamas over a more lasting truce.
During this time, the forces on the ground will remain in place. We urge all parties to act with restraint until this humanitarian ceasefire begins and to fully abide by their commitments during the ceasefire. This ceasefire is critical to giving innocent civilians a much-needed reprieve from violence.
But this ceasefire announced in a joint statement by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry appears to be more significant than a shorter ceasefire that fell apart a week ago. Now, this time, Israeli and Palestinian negotiators will head to Cairo for formal talks on how to end the conflict, which has resulted in the death of more than 1,400 Palestinians and 64 on the Israeli side. And there are more disturbing news. Health officials worldwide are watching the deadliest Ebola outbreak in West Africa very closely. Now, many are concerned that it's getting out of control and could spread around the globe. That's a scenario that officials are working very hard to avoid. The World Health Organization is preparing a $100 million plan to contain this deadly virus, which has already killed more than 700 people since breaking out earlier this year. Our Connie Lee has this report.
Health authorities in West Africa are struggling to contain a deadly Ebola outbreak.
To look over this fence right behind you now and look at the patients, and you know that their chances are very small, and it's horrible.
More than 700 people, including dozens of health workers, have died so far from this year's outbreak, and there are currently more than 1,300 others who are confirmed to have the virus. Sierra Leone, one of the hardest hit countries, is currently in a state of emergency, and health officials have begun to quarantine certain areas. The rapid spread of the virus is putting a strain on the nation.
Already we had a very inadequate health workforce, and we don't have enough specialists in country as far as medical doctors and even specialist nurses are concerned.
That concern has spread throughout the world. The World Health Organization said Thursday that it is launching a $100 million response plan to combat Ebola in West Africa.
The plan includes, identifies a whole range of medical personnel required to help support the response to the outbreak.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has advised Americans to avoid non-essential travel to Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. And according to CNN and USA Today, the U.S. government plans to test an experimental Ebola vaccine as early as September. There is currently no cure or vaccine for Ebola, and the fatality rate of the current outbreak stands at about 60%. Connie Lee, ARIRANG News.
And over in Taiwan, a series of underground gas explosions has torn through its second largest city, killing 24 people and injuring hundreds of others. Fire officials say it happened around midnight local time in Kaohsiung, adding that firefighters responding to initial reports of a gas leak were among the fatalities. Now, Taiwan's premier said there were at least 5 powerful blasts, while the director of its disaster agency said the gas was likely propane, which is not extinguishable by water. The explosion shot through the city's sewage system, spawning huge flames and creating giant holes resembling huge caves. Residents told the local media that it felt like the area had been hit by a powerful earthquake. Now, on a different note, back here in this country, the amount of people using the Android operating system hit an all-time high during the second quarter of this year. Well, that's according to a market research firm, Strategy Analytics, and it says that global smartphone shipments reached 295 million units in the April to June period this year, which is up 27% from the same period last year. Now, of those, 85% were Android smartphones, jumping nearly 5 percentage points from a year earlier. The market share of Apple iOS fell to 12%. Microsoft dropped to 2.7%, while BlackBerry and others also lost ground. Now, there is a service out there that's foreign to many Seoulites, but is catching on like wildfire. The smartphone app-based car service Uber has been in Korea for about a year now, and users have started to enjoy their smooth rides, even though it comes at a steeper price. But Uber has recently run into some roadblocks. The Seoul city government says the service is illegal and is looking to block the app. Lee Ji-yeon reports.
Kim Il-min is a software engineer and startup business owner. He's also an avid user of the viral car service Uber, which landed in Seoul just about a year ago. With a simple tap on a smartphone app, Kim has a luxurious ride ready to take him across town. His personal pickups are usually reserved for special occasions when he wants an extra something for himself, and he says that's what makes the experience special.
The drivers are a lot friendlier, so it feels good as a passenger.
Uber is now found in more than 150 cities across the world, but the service is still relatively new in Seoul, and the premium black sedan service, Uber Black, is so far the only option available. But the Seoul city government strongly opposes Uber's service and just last week threatened to ban the app, calling it illegal. It says Uber is encroaching on the business of other taxi drivers in Seoul. So how much of a problem is it in Korea's mega capital? We asked taxi drivers whether they know about Uber, and the response was no, no, and no. Only 3 out of 20 drivers were aware of the application. And it's not so much about Uber snatching up their customers, it was more about the legality of their cars. It's an argument echoing Seoul City's stance on the car service. But Uber denies this, saying it uses car companies already licensed for business operation. And users say those cars have been providing excellent service in a city where at times it's impossible to get a cab, especially in downtown areas late at night. They say it's a comfortable, convenient option at your fingertips.
And that option, I believe, should be available for all citizens. And I don't think that necessarily takes the pie out of any industry, but we just create that option for that special need.
And while saying it will actively try to block the Uber service, Seoul says it will create its own app for cab drivers in the city.
The fact that there's demand for the service, even though it's more expensive, means there's a problem with existing taxi services.
Meanwhile, Uber says it wants more people to know about the service so they can hitch their rides, not on a curb, but on their phones. Lee Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
Well, this weekend, the next are generally considered the peak summer vacation period here in Korea. And often it's when vacationers head off on a big trip overseas. But this year, many are choosing to spend their break at any one of Korea's prime holiday spots. Our Shin Se-min brings us this very encouraging report from the holiday city of Busan.
The peak summer vacation season is here. From late July and early August every year, more than half of Korea's population takes time away from their daily grind to go on vacation, especially now that school's out.
My 11-year-old daughter is free from school and academies these 2 weeks, which is why we're taking our family vacation now.
Many Koreans tend to go overseas for their holiday, but this year, with the economy stagnant due to the nation's April ferry disaster, vacationers are opting to stay within the country. Among the numerous sites to visit, many are choosing to head to beaches or valleys to beat the heat. Popular destinations like the southeastern port city of Busan are overloaded with people enjoying the sun and surf. Filling almost every inch of the 1.7-kilometer stretch of sand, the nation's largest beach has already welcomed over 1.5 million people this past Sunday alone.
Spending my vacation with my friends in Busan couldn't have been better. We've planned many things during our stay.
As an office worker, it wasn't as easy to take days off for the vacation, but now that I'm here with my girlfriend from Japan, I plan to eat and show her as many attractions in Busan.
And with the week-long Busan Sea Festival kicking off this Friday, including concerts and bikini competitions, the city is sure to attract even more visitors.
It's crowded and can be expensive, but that hasn't stopped the flow of vacationers descending on Busan in the past and won't this year either. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News, Busan.
And that's just about all for this edition of ARIRANG News. I'm Moon Gun-young. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again at 6 p.m. Korea time, an early edition at 6.